Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. John Kelly, Profiler. I hope you're all well today and having a really good day. Today, we're going to be doing a special show. Please hang in there with us. It's going to be profiling the Long Island serial killer. We want to go over a profile we did in 2011 on the Long Island serial killer, and we want you to judge on how close we came. This profile has been out there since 2011 on our STALK team website. That is STALK Incorporated, System to Apprehend Lethal Killers is what it stands for. But if you decide to just search STALK Incorporated, you will see it come up. However, I am going to go over it with you today. I'm going to run it down for you, and I'm going to give you the profile points, and you could rate us on how close we were back in 2011. We've decided to hold back on this because we were talking with different production companies. We're still talking, but we're interested in talking to more production companies, okay? And getting a clear view on which direction we want to go in here, all right? Most importantly for us, please, if you like what we're doing, hit a like button. If you don't like what we're doing, then don't hit a like button. Also subscribe. We love your subscriptions. Please subscribe and comment. We love your comments. You know we answer all your comments. We get back to you. Please, if you like, subscribe. You know, again, I have to bring out that Rex Heuermann is innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. That is very, very important. We can't say that enough. And hopefully, you will gain some interest from this. It is not the first time we've ever done something like this, but they have been far and few in between. Because like I said, we did this back in 2011. Okay, so we all know who the Long Island serial killer is. Let's take a look at our profile that we did in 2011. Okay, this is a partial profile of the Long Island, New York serial killer, AKA we named him the Sweet Talking Killer. Okay, and this was done and posted on December 1st, 2011. This killer is a sexual sadist who obtains a high from seeing women suffer and die. He enjoys watching violent pornography. He is very familiar with the Long Island area and his dump sites. He is between the ages of 34 and 50. You guys can check that out if you like. Again, Mr. Heuermann is innocent until proven guilty. He has had and is known for having a long-time fascination with law enforcement and has acquired police paraphernalia over the years. That I'm not too sure about. He is very literate with computers and communications in general. Because of this, he is probably very adept at computer-generated sounds, voices, or phrases. He could be a collector of cell phones, not only of ones belonging to the victims. Remember, recently we've heard they've found a lot of devices with Rex Heuermann, okay? He is very organized and he is above average intelligence. He's very organized with a place for everything and everything in its place. That would be his motto. And the word controlling could be his middle name. Again, he's above average intelligence. He also drives an enclosed vehicle, probably a van. That's what we were thinking back in the day. He hates women and historically probably physically abused them in relationships. So he has some kind of history of abuse towards women and has had some rough relationships before he got into his murderous ways, and then maybe even in his murdering spree. He probably feels that his mother didn't take care of him when he was a child, and he's been betrayed by women through a lack of nurturing and through their infidelity. Okay. Something about him that has caused him to have this hatred and violence towards women. He is a very auditory person who can be a charming talker, who also socializes well. He's probably a major bragger about himself to others and what he believes are his accomplishments. Then don't forget, we saw a lot, with Rex Heuermann doing his commercials and selling his company on an internet commercial, I believe. But the bottom line is, I cannot say he is the Long Island serial killer. He's a suspect for the Long Island serial killer and killings. But bottom line is, he's innocent to proven guilty. He will probably not brag about the murders. He has an affinity for social networking sites, especially Craigslist, to search for his victims from a pool of escort service providers. He has the luxury of being able to spend a lot of time on the phone, qualifying his victims to find out or to find the right one of opportunity. He has a way of finding out which prostitutes or sex workers don't have a driver, pimp, or someone watching over them. Perhaps he utilizes a voice stress analyzer. I think we gave whoever the killer is a little bit more modernization or technical modernization than we should have there, but we'll see. The majority of the women he called have not met his criteria for him to make them victims because they were too much of a risk for him. Somehow he knew through his conversations that they had someone watching over them. The phone is this predator's thing for sure. He probably has a history of abuse, demeaning phone sex, sexual harassment, or harassment in general by phone. This harassment most likely took place against ex-girlfriends or any females who may have crossed him socially or in the workplace. This guy doesn't do well with anybody that criticizes him, especially a female. Phone harassment may have also taken place against men who believes that he has crossed them in some way. In other words, this guy is very much into phones and using phones to demean or to create chaos in somebody's life, okay? Serial killers may not feel any guilt or remorse, but they do feel fear. The Long Island serial killer is feeling fear of apprehension. He's also a baby killer, and he's feeling the fear of his fiendish deed. It's only a matter of time until authorities arrest him. When that happens, he will probably spend the rest of his life in prison. He should know that in prison, the majority of inmates hate baby killers and will treat him accordingly. Some punishments are worse than death. Now, that's what we did in 2011. I will leave it up to you to think about how close we were to the Long Island serial killer, or what you think about our profile on the Long Island serial killer that we did back in 2011. Now, of course, how we got to the different points of the profile, the profiling points in general, I mean, that's something for another day, and that's something actually that should be produced by a production company through the eyes of the profilers, is the treatment we've written that should be put out there through a series or an extended show, because we had to go through great lengths to break down the Long Island serial killer's behavior and try to put it together based on the information we had. And keep in mind, there was not any or not a lot of information given out at all by law enforcement at that time. and they were under the direction of a very corrupt chief of police over in Long Island. So with that being said, if you want to look at the profile itself on the STALK website, it's been there since 2011. Feel free to go to STALK Incorporated System to Apprehend Lethal Killers. All right, now let's get to Dustin. Dustin's here, okay? And Dustin, I mean, you have really been hitting the pavement pretty hard over there in Long Island, you know? I mean, I give you a lot of credit for getting down there and literally jumping into the weeds, right? I mean,
Literally.
in the weeds, no doubt about it, you know? So how did it go? What do you think? It's a pleasure we have Dustin Ranck here today. You've seen him so many other times. I mean, he's just like one of the family, you know, and it's like, you know, hey, Dustin, how you doing? But a formal introduction is needed. This is Dustin Ranck, really, really street smart kind of private investigator, really knows his stuff. We're proud of and honored to work with him. And like I said, he's been hitting the pavement hard over in Long Island. Go ahead, Dustin.
Yeah, thanks again for having me on the show, John. It's always great to be here with you and your audience. Yeah, it's been pretty interesting, you know, when I first hit the ground down here, you know, as we're looking at the cases that we know of down here on the South Shore. There's obviously we've got a cluster of bodies that they've discovered kind of on that north end of Ocean Parkway, but we also have an outlier in Shannon Gilbert, and that was kind of the first place that I started. And I'm not going to say how I got access to it, but was able to, you know, it was able to walk that route. And you know, when we go back and we listen to the 911 calls, and we kind of understand a little bit more from a 30,000-foot view of, you know, the last bit that we know about Shannon. And you know, because that place, it's one way in, one way out, and it just makes a lot of sense. And I could absolutely be wrong, but it makes a ton of sense if somebody is who is in distress, and you know, you've got a driver who is facing potential, you know, criminal action, and you've got a house full of partying people with who knows what. You know, I wasn't there, I don't know what was going on at that party, but you can safely say if they're hiring sex workers or partying, you can just kind of do the math from there. But you know, when you're looking at that area and you're looking at that house specifically, there's only one way for her to go to get away from these guys, and that's into that wooded, you know, that shrubby area. And from that area, now you can, depending on what time of day is, you know, Ocean Parkway, yeah, it's got people on it. It's not, you know, it's not the most heavily trafficked highway on the planet, but it is close to the highway. So if there were any cars at all, you could see kind of, you know, if you're tracking from where you kind of get into those woods, that wooded area, really, it's really more shrubby, but when you get into the weeds there, you can hear the cars right there on Ocean Parkway. And you know, there's the Robert Moses Causeway too, that's running over, you know, that lands there and then kind of hops again over to Fire Island, which we also know that there was some evidence found there too as well. And you could actually see that from parts of, you know, if you're way down in it, you're not gonna, but you know, it kind of slopes down, it's kind of in a bowl. And it would just make a lot of sense to me that poor Shannon, you know, she's having this, she's distressed, you know, whatever, and she's just trying to get away from these guys, that she just runs in there to get safe. But once you're in there, you know, unless you're pretty good at navigating stuff, you know, and your head is clear, yeah, it could be a little disorienting. But man, you know, you could see her trying to maybe make her way to the highway if she's got any audible sense going on, if there's any cars at all, if she can see any of the lights, because it was early morning, it would make sense that she goes that way to either just get away or to try to find help, because that is the only way that you are going to go. And when I see that as an outlier, it's a little tough for me to reconcile it against the cluster that we have, which is literally just across the highway in east or west, excuse me, just a little bit. I mean, it's literally all right there. So I started thinking to myself, you know, why that area? Well, for any local, and talking to a lot of locals here on the island, I mean, whether it's summer or winter, it's not, especially at night and especially in the wee hours, Ocean Parkway isn't going to have a ton of, it's not going to have a ton of traffic. And with the highway being bisected right there, as you move further west, the highway comes together a little bit more. So it's pretty, if you're going west from the causeway, it's a pretty remote spot. You could park a car for 2 seconds, drop a body real quick, you're on your road. You either circle back around and come back onto the mainland along Island, or you take a crossover and go back the way that you came. But it interests me too, because I mean, it makes a lot of sense that it would be there because it's pretty remote, right? But also, if we have a guy, if we've got a killer that has any kind of, trophy sensibility or, visual sensibility, I've heard you talk about this a bunch, that he might stage up his victims in a place that is maybe not too far from his house. If he's traveling over that bridge, or he's traveling Ocean Parkway, or even if he's from mainland Long Island. I mean, those peninsulas along the south shore of the mainland, there's tons of parks there. I could see a guy spending time in those parks and able to look across the water and see what he's done there. And he's got this little stash, because they're so closely grouped, it can't be random. I mean, it could be, but the probability is not really there. So seeing that,
just for a second, I totally agree with you, because these guys always return to the crime scene, at least
that's right.
usually over and over, because of the sexual excitement they get reliving, the abduction, the sexual dominance, and the murder. So you're right.
Absolutely.
I mean, they do go to certain points to look over and relive, that sexual dominance that they had at that time, and the killing and everything, because they really get off to it. I mean, there's no question about it. I mean, I know serial killers that they write about it. They keep writing it. They want to keep it fresh in their mind. They're always in that fantasy, and they're always going over their conquests. They're always going over their conquests in their mind. One serial killer said, you can't, you might put me in prison, but you can't take me out of my mind. I'm sorry. Go ahead, continue. It's an important point you
No.
made.
Well, that was a great point you made too. As I'm looking at that geography, and if you kind of take like a map view of it, it looks very much like a stage, in a sense, where you've got a barrier, and then you've got an audience, and then you've got the stage there on the mainland. So I could see somebody having that kind of reference, especially if they're feeling really good about it. So you said that, in your profile, this guy really thought highly of himself, bragging about, whatever exploits he's got going on. He may not be bragging about the murders, obviously,
Right.
because he's got away with it so long, but there's a lot of things that they might, and we've talked about this too, you substituting things in allegory where you're not coming out directly and saying it, but I'll bet if you talk to any suspect long enough, they're good. And you say this all the time too, keep them talking. I'll bet that they're, if, and we don't know, like you said, if Mr. Heuermann is the guy, I bet if you got him talking, I bet if you're looking for the right things and he did do it, that you're going to find some commonalities between that location and those women. And another thing I thought was interesting too, John, is I'm kind of going back through a little bit of the history of Long Island, and we look at the time that those bodies were discovered, and we look what's going on now. Now it's not massively advertised on Long Island, even though it's common knowledge to the locals that I spoke with. And I've also seen on more than one occasion since I've been here, police, details. And I don't mean like a couple of cops, working the highway, chatting it up in between tickets. I mean, they're looking for something, but they're looking at different places on Long Island now. And what they're looking for, they're being pretty quiet about. I think we all know what they're looking for. I mean, this is a separate thing from the chemical barrels that they've been finding in the park. I mean, it's common knowledge that they're still looking for bodies. At least that's the common knowledge that's been communicated to me. And I ran across that a couple of times. But what makes this interesting to me is that timeline, like all this time later, like, they find all these poor women that have been brutally murdered. And then we fast forward to 2023. Well, what just happened right after they found those bodies? We had a massive, massive natural disaster in Hurricane Sandy, and it wiped out a good chunk of that South Shore along Ocean Parkway. And,
Excellent point. Excellent point.
and you can better believe if that guy is still active, of course he's going to move it. He's going to move, his stash places, his dump spot, whatever he's calling it. He's going to move it to somewhere else to keep it more preserved. And it also made me wonder because, on both sides of that shore, the South Shore, typically, that's where the beaches are, but you've still got a lot of wooded and shrubby area, but that north end's a little quieter. There are some little residential areas over there, but it's a little more protected too from just standard storm surge and stuff like that. So you could see somebody, it'd been a long time since there was a hurricane that bad historically in on Island, even though they experience that stuff on a semi-regular basis. But the real big ones, I think, another one somebody told me back was like in the late 30s or 40s or something. But for a long time, that little stretch has been it's been preserved a little bit. So that was a interesting commonality that I just thought to myself, well, after Hurricane Sandy, and now they're looking for all these bodies still. And now I don't know what all the behind the scenes intel is on that with local law enforcement. I don't have that connection here, but you can bet it's important. That's why they're still spending the man hours and the dollars to keep looking for these other areas.
You better believe it. Yeah, we always say when we're ever working a case, okay, we've got these victims, God bless them, that have been identified, but probably we don't have the earlier victims. And
That's right.
God knows how many victims a serial killer can have. I mean, you look at Gary Ridgway, you're talking 48 and up, and
Yeah,
to be honest with you, I don't believe they got all of them. I mean, so serial killers, supposedly the magic numbers when you break it down, it's like 20, per ratio per serial killer. But bottom line is, man, oh man, how many did Bundy kill? We named, Gary Ridgway 48. How many did Cullen, the nurse, kill? Even though it was,
right.
Out on the street, it was in a hospital setting. But my God, how many?
Mm-hmm.
They really don't know for sure. They really don't know for sure. Some people even think it's way over 100, and even some people are talking about 200. Working in a hospital for what, 15 years and getting away and go from one hospital to another. I mean, these guys just have an unbelievable body count. And
For sure.
I never believe when a serial killer gets arrested that you got them all. You may get
Mm-hmm.
them all, especially if the death penalty is on the line, but his control issues and his obsession with control keeps him from wanting to give up bodies he's possessing in his brain. They're like his possession. He owns them. So you're right. He doesn't
Well, and
want.
it's yeah, and I don't know if we talked about this on the show, but it's funny that you mentioned Ridgway because they recently, and we've talked about this, and I'm going somewhere with it, but we had talked about how much of a traveler Gary was, and recently, like within the last year, they found another body in Tualatin, Oregon, which was right by where I used to work, and it's where I have a bunch of friends. So, and we know that he was all over Oregon and Mount Hood and Central Oregon. So if they're finding bodies this far down the road, you better believe that there's more. But it kind of leads me into the next thing is that we know that, guilty or not, we don't know. Obviously, Mr. Heuermann isn't afraid to travel. He commutes every day. I mean, hell, I took that train, I took that ride, and I walked to where I didn't go to his office, obviously, but that area of Manhattan. And that you got to make. I mean, people do it obviously every single day because it's kind of the nature of living in a high density population area with good public trans. But obviously, that dude's not afraid to put some miles on because he just did it every day. I mean, hell, it's you know 20 minutes to get to the rail from Massapequa. Maybe you got a parking permit. You get your stuff unloaded, or your wife drops you off, or whatever. Then you got to wait for the train. You catch the train. It's an hour and change, down into Manhattan. Boom, you got to get out, maybe grab a subway or a cab or a bus or walk. So he obviously doesn't mind getting around, and it kind of all tied back to made me wonder what's going on with all these other searches that are going on around Long Island, if there's a connection there or not.
Well, they're looking, and I'll be surprised if they don't find more
Yeah.
bodies. And like I said, Rex Heuermann's a suspect, but that doesn't make him a killer. A court can only,
Yeah.
make him a killer if he's found guilty. But don't forget, you've had other serial killers. You've had John Burloff out on Long Island,
Hmm.
at Shulman out on Long Island. I mean,
And
I'll
was
be
it Rifkin was out here
surprised.
too,
And
wasn't
Manorville, John Burloff, lived right by that
he?
Manor
Hmm.
area where they were searching. So, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if they pop up tomorrow with bones and have
Yeah.
more victims. Nothing would surprise me at all with this case. I mean, the way this case has gone from all these years, and then having the whole law enforcement breakdown because of that corrupt
Hmm.
that was running the case and calling the shots on the case, who finally went off to prison. I mean, the whole thing was like just blown up, right? And
Yeah.
kudos to Long Island law enforcement. They put it back together. We talked to some detectives back in the day when we were coming up and coming across this stuff and coming up with the information on our profile. And they were really passionate, concerned, and cared immensely about finding the Long Island serial killer and getting justice for the victims and their families. And then all of a sudden, these poor detectives, I think they ended up retiring, without having closure. Hopefully, they're alive. They're alive now to see this moving in, the right direction, and law enforcement really making some progress, and finally, the work they did,
Hmm.
was well worth it, and it was meaningful to them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, yeah. So anyway, I guess pretty much that's where we're at today, and it's a really good breakdown you gave me. I mean, I wasn't that familiar with it like you are with the land itself. Okay. I'm a mine guy, not a land guy. And with these different visual points of interest that you made on the area, I think that's very, very important as well. And I think we're just going to have to wait and see how this all turns out. My sincere condolences go out too to Shannon Gilbert and her family too. She has not been included, I believe, as a victim of the Long Island serial killer. And we're going to have to wait and see how that goes, and what goes on with that. But I think the ruling was, that she was not murdered. Or they're not sure. I mean, there's different pieces and stories on that and everything, but her attorney's going after it, so I'm sure the family's attorney anyways going after it. So I'm sure there'll be an answer sooner than later. Um, but there's a lot of information out there. How much of it is solid? How much of it's true? How much of it's just BS? Not true? I don't know. We're just going to
Hmm.
have to sit back and kind of see what happens, But I wanted to just bring out our profile hits today and get your impressions on the geography there. And that point you made about, him being able to look over the land and the different sites and the different dump sites where he dumped bodies and relive that sexual excitement. That's what they live for. They live for that.
Yeah.
They live for that fantasy.
Yeah, and that really struck me as I was roaming around down here, because it's hard to ignore that that's a pretty huge cluster of bodies we got down there that they pulled up back in, was 2010, 11. And yeah, it's a bad deal.
Yeah, sad all the way around, and so more will be revealed, my friend.
Absolutely.
Is there anything you want to say before we break?
No, I think we got it covered, John. Like, I still got a few days left to, keep noodling around Long Island, and I want to just kind of give a shout out to the locals down here, man. They're just super cool. I'm getting along great with them, and they're just super warm, and they're great conversationalists. And it's like anytime you're looking into something, it really, there's a lot of angles, as you always say, and being a tattoo guy, it's really advantageous for me to kind of make inroads in different places that maybe people aren't looking, or just what's the chatter behind the scenes. People speak differently to law enforcement than they do to a private investigator. So obviously there's no bombshell at this point or anything. I'm just making observations and trying to see if where the overlaps are that might help law enforcement down the road. So just want to give a big shout out to the locals. They've been super cool.
And the picture you present is done very well, my friend. You do it very well.
But thank
So
you very much.
I want to tell you thank you so much for appearing today and for letting us know, because this was information we're kind of vague on, and you kind of underlined it and nailed it down. So that's what's important. So have a great weekend, and I'm going to talk to our audience as well. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Please have a great holiday. Have a great weekend. Please stay safe out there. Most importantly, stay on your toes and take care of yourself. We live in a dangerous world. And until next time, again, thanks and God bless.
Yeah, thanks a lot, John. Thanks to your audience as well.
Our pleasure. Thank you.